So hi, uh, it's yeah. The people who I've been talking with, they're like, "What are you calling this?" And all I said was, "I have no idea. All I know is that I want to say hi. I'm Christina, and I've got the great opportunity to keep having a conversation with who's ever on the screen. And today it's Kyle Anderson, who's back in Las Vegas. Um, I know that, and prior to this all coming about, I had explained how this is an opportunity that I've wanted to pursue. But with everything that is happening in the country, from the economic crisis to the pandemic crisis to the continuous racism and hatred crisis in the country, there's never a right time to start something, but then there is a right time if it's meant well and there's well intention to it. And so this is an opportunity to have a conversation, preserve the conversation, share your story. No topic is off the table. Wherever our conversation goes, it goes. And I'm so happy to have this opportunity with you, Kyle, to talk about your new adventure in Las Vegas and everything else that is coming up. So, how is it being back from Nevada? Well, no, actually, you stayed in Nevada. You stayed in the same
Yeah, I
state.
did. Yep. Yeah, and a lot of people, people in Nevada will joke that Northern Nevada and Southern Nevada are two different states, kind of like, California, there's that divide, Southern California, Northern Nevada as well. But yeah, it's interesting because I lived in Las Vegas for 13 years. This is where I cut my teeth as an educator. I moved from college in Michigan straight to Nevada, and that's where I was. And then went to Reno for a couple of years and taught in Carson City while my wife was attending grad school. And as she was getting ready to finish up, we were trying to figure out, do we find a place around here and I stay at my school and she find a job, or do we go back? And a lot of different factors went into the decision about that. But I will say that late February was really when it was solidified, I think, that we were moving back. And
Why end of February?
so for months, 6 months prior to that, we had gotten some tickets to a Vegas Golden Knights game, and for a weekend in late February, and it was to celebrate my wife's birthday, and then a good friend of ours, Allison. It was her birthday is the day before, so when we lived here before, pretty much for almost every year for 13 years, that we always did something around that weekend to celebrate both of them because their birthdays were back to back like that.
Yeah.
And Allison, when I say she learned that the Saturday night game, the weekend of their birthdays, this couple months ago from this recording, was not only going to be a home game for the Golden Knights, but it was also going to be the celebration of the 40th anniversary of the 1980 USA Hockey gold medal team, and that they were going to be in Vegas and they were going to honor them on the ice, and it's going to be all these different things. So we all decided, let's get one of the suites and we'll, just have a whole bunch of people. It'll be great. So we organized this whole deal where there's about 30 of us, where we all went up to, it's called the Hyde Lounge. So it wasn't necessarily a suite. It's this bar where you pay to get in there, and then there's like a minimum tab or something. So overall, it ended up costing like $150 a person to go. Just a great deal. So we went to Vegas and went to that game, and what really kind of solidified it for me, I can't speak for my wife because I think she was already convinced she wanted to go back, but I'm talking to one of my best friends, Allison's husband, Mike, and he this is where it gets vulnerable. He says to me, Kyle, I really, really hope you consider coming back. You don't know how much you mean to me, and I really would like my best friend back. And at this point, I had had a couple Jamesons and other various cocktails, and somebody started cutting onions in the ice arena a little bit. So tears started rolling a little bit. I'm just like, don't do this, man. And yeah, and we both embraced it. And yeah, I basically sobbed on his shoulder for a minute. Over the rest of the weekend, it was decided that we were going to move back to Vegas, I think, at that point. I mean, there was a lot of factors, but that's the one that really sticks out in my mind. My best friend made me cry.
What's So, right, the community. Did you feel like you didn't have a sense of community when you were in Reno?
Yes and no. Um, where I taught at in Carson City, small town, one high school for the entire town, 2,200 students about. The community itself, they're very strong. The community is very involved in the school, and to the point where we would start school in the middle of August, and if you went by just a standard schedule, that would get you out before Memorial Day.
Hmm.
But the community didn't want to have graduation before Memorial Day or on Memorial Day weekend. So they basically would say, you need to figure out a way to extend the school year more. So right now, today, as we're recording this, is actually graduation day in the community, where it's going to be, in the parking lot and the cars and whatnot. But we would get random 4-day weekends thrown into the school year to extend the school year. So, which was nice too. There is that long stretch. Anybody that's ever taught knows that stretch from January to spring break can get a little bit tough. So,
Yeah.
having a 4-day weekend once a month during that time is very nice. So yes, the community is very strong there, very invested. But because my wife is in grad school, we're talking like anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day most days. We're on one income. So I was doing different things. I was teaching adult ed and doing some tech coaching on the side just to try to make a little extra money to make up for the lost income. I don't want to say I didn't have friends, but I didn't have a lot of friends to where I could really just go out and unwind every now and then.
Hmm.
And the ones I did, our schedules are always so different. So my podcast partner for the Beer EDU podcast, Ben, we live 4 miles apart, and we've recorded 73 episodes, only 10 of which have been in person because our schedules are just so crazy. And I mean, we lived 4 miles apart. Now, we joke that now that I've moved from Reno to Las Vegas, we're probably going to see each other more often because he comes down to Vegas every now and then. So, yeah. So, I mean, like I said, it was a strong community, but I didn't feel so much a part of it and that was more on me because of the necessity of having to do stuff to try to make up for lost income with my wife in grad school.
Yeah, it's finding those connections that are really hard. Like you know that the community is strong, but if you're not in the community, making those connections can be a struggle. I was talking with a colleague friend of mine, and they were saying how they're moving this weekend to a completely different city because the community where they're currently at isn't their community anymore. They don't have that sense of solidarity with others in that proximity. Whereas for them to be in this other city, there are more people like them. And so they're already making those connections and getting, I don't want to say accepted into the community. It's just this natural fit
Right.
where they all feel bonded and connected. And so I think it's, you can make a community wherever you are, but if it's, I don't know, maybe I'm going to start like bird walking on this one when it comes to community and connection, but like if you're constantly putting effort and like emphasis and time into making that community, I don't know if it's worth it. Whereas like if you find that community that's just that natural fit and you don't really have to do anything, you're just in it.
Well, and it also
I
speaks
don't know,
to,
push back to that. Cause like sometimes
yeah,
people are like, well, no, you have to put effort if you're going to maintain a community. So I don't know.
yeah. Well, but that also speaks to as we all get older, it becomes that much harder. I watch my 8-year-old and my 5-year-old, and I could take them to the park and they just find kids and they talk and they play. And then as we leave, they're like, that's my new friend. And it's like, well, maybe not. I mean, there's a really, really good chance you're never going to see that kid again. But you know what? I mean, it's just so easy for them. Whereas as adults, you and I are both, I'll say that my age is late 30s. You can say your age if you'd like to. I know that rule, but with women in age. So, but
hey, it doesn't necessarily have to be with women.
well, you're absolutely right, but there is that stereotype out there.
I know, and I don't like
So,
it.
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of weird too. So, but anyway, I digress. But it becomes that much harder when you get older to really connect with people and to make friends, because and it's a combination of a lot of factors. It's schedules, work schedules. I already talked about how my good friend Ben and we live 4 miles apart and we never saw each other because of our work schedules. And then when it comes to interests, where I like to have a beer and watch sports and go on hikes, and there's some people that they don't like to do that.
Yeah.
Or even the people that like to be physically active. I'm more of like I'll go for a bike ride, I'll go for a hike, and while I haven't done it in a while, I like to lift weights. There's some people they just, well, I'm not a weightlifter, so where it just makes it that much harder, um, because your interests are different and everything. And then you can start getting into things like, well, I love hockey, like, well, hockey sucks, I like baseball, or I like metal and punk, well, no, I listen to country. So there's all these different factors that just make it so much harder to connect with people as you get older. So, and that really goes in that community piece as well. So and then just kind of going back to the community where I was working, I lived 30 miles away too. I was commuting into that community. So that made it hard to really connect with that community as well, because my colleagues would have, get-togethers or whatever before COVID-19, and they say, "Hey, why don't you come on over?" I'm like, well, time I go home, get changed, get ready or whatever, then I got to come back. And then, I'm not saying I have to have a beer to go have a good time or something like that, but if I have a couple, I'm not going to be able to, now I got to go find a room or something like that, and taking an Uber, you might as well get a room from 30 miles away. So
Yeah.
that just makes it that much harder as well.
So this is right. So a couple of things that now I'm intrigued by, or just thinking about, is that with children, they don't have hesitations. Or, I mean, children are so vulnerable that they're willing to put themselves out there and make new friends, even if it is for that one day. It's like, hey, I don't know if I'll ever see you again, but we're going to be friends for right now, and because we're in the same time, same place, and so let's talk, right? And I think that is so phenomenal. And why is it that as you do get older, that there are these barriers or challenges or walls or fences, defenses put up, that then, in this mindset of like, oh, yep, I'm not going to talk with that person. It's like, well, why not? What's so wrong with saying hi to somebody and waving to somebody? You never know what great conversation might come out of that. And why there's this hesitation as we get older is awkward to me. Like, when does that shift happen from childhood vulnerability to this adulthood sense of, I need to protect myself and I'm not going to say hi to people? So I don't know why that is. And then to think about the like-mindedness, it's, I think that, so like thinking about you and I, I'll go to a hockey game, but I have no idea who the players are. Like, if anything, I'll go for the food and like the cheering, and I'll be great, right?
Yep.
But we have this sense of like-mindedness and that allows us to be connected, and we are in a community, and so there are different pockets of communities. We're in a professional community that allowed us to connect instantaneously because we're like-minded in that set. But just because we don't like the same music per se or the same sports doesn't mean that we can't be connected in other ways.
Right. Yeah, because I think back to the first time you and I really truly met. I mean, we had been connected through social media for a while, and then it was at a Q conference a few years ago in Palm Springs, and I remember watching you, and I believe it was I think Lindsay Blass spoke with you, and then I forget who else. There was a third person. I can't remember who it was now. And I remember I was watching your presentation thinking like, this is somebody I think would be really great to come present at a Q in Nevada event, which I was a board member at the time. And I just walked up to you afterward and said like, hey, I'd really like to talk to you about this sometime. And you're like, well, do you have a second? Let's talk now. And that second was, I remember it was like an hour and a half. It got to the point where we cut our conversation off because we were sitting outside in the sun, and I think we were both getting sunburned at that point. So that was like, but you and I are both. I'm typically pretty extroverted. I get that vibe from you a little bit. You're not afraid to go talk to people, but you're right. There's so many people that just they have those barriers up and that guard up, and there's just this fear of not fitting in is not the right way to say it,
Mm,
but a lot of people have that fear. And maybe it is the way of saying it for some people. Like, they're afraid of not fitting in, or there's this imposter syndrome where why would this person take me seriously? What can I really offer to say and
mhm,
whatnot? And before we started this conversation, I didn't really have much of an intention of really referring to my book that I wrote, but this actually kind of applies to it. So I wrote a book called To the Edge: Successes and Failures to Risk Taking. And while the book is more about like where I looked at different risks in my life and then the lessons I learned from those, the whole idea behind it was to inspire other people to be risk takers as well. And this is kind of like it's really connecting with what we're talking about right now, where people have these barriers, they have these fears, but really, I mean, so there's how many times in your life is there a risk that you're going to take that is just absolutely life changing? Where if had I not talked to you, would my life be much different? Yes and no. I consider you a great friend now. Okay, so I wouldn't have you as a friend in my life, but at the same time, had I never went up and talked to you about that whole deal, I mean, life would have gone on for me or
mhm.
whatever. So if people was to take a look at my book and what I wrote and garner one lesson from it about taking more risks, that I've done my job at that point. And I don't want to turn this into a conversation about promoting my book by any means, but I just feel that people that they should be more willing to take risks in their life, because the benefits that you can get from taking a risk certainly outweigh the negatives. Now, you definitely have to consider negatives depending on the situation and the decision that you're making. But I mean, there's so many different things that can come out of it that are great as long as you're just willing to take that risk.
And I appreciate you saying that there, someone might want to take a risk, go and explore and do something that they've wanted to do, but they just haven't. Um, I think about risks that I want to take, or not risks. There are things I want to do in life, but the minute I became a parent, it's not about me.
Right.
I put my kids first and foremost, and I really have to think about what impact is my decision going to have on my kids, and if the risk outweighs the impact, it's hard. I mean, there are
Yeah.
so many things that I do want to do. I have a bucket list, I really do, but
Yeah.
that bucket.
But as a parent, it might not be the best time to take up rock climbing or bungee jumping or something like that. I know that's an extreme example, but
No, but that's true though. Like
yeah.
you jump off a cliff every time you do something new. It's
Hmm.
exhilarating, it's adventurous. You're doing something that is unknown to you. And that's thrilling, whatever it might be. I have to think about, that there are just times when I can't do it. It's not because I don't want to, I can't. And then I think about how many times that word can't prevents me from doing something. And then I think about happiness, and am I any less happy if I don't do something on that bucket list? And then I start going into this like whirlwind spiral where it's like, well, am I then selfish in thinking that I don't have enough? And why can't I be happy with what I have? And I am happy with what I have, but does that mean that I can't try something new in life? And I don't know. I'm happy. Are you happy? Are you happy, Kyle?
I'm happy. Yes, I am. I have a wonderful family. I have parents that are very supportive. In fact, when this whole pandemic hit, I was living in Reno, and my parents lived a few hours away in Northern California. And when the pandemic hit, we went and stayed with them, and it was because it was I know I had a place where I could focus better, and I knew I would be supported. With my where I was living at in Reno, there really wasn't a place where my kids could go like out in the yard and rip around when I needed to actually work and whatnot. So, and then my mom was able to help out with that and whatever. And, so there was a lot of things. So we went and stayed with them for several weeks, and, that was really nice. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. As much as I love my parents, it can get tough at times if you're staying with them for extended periods or whatever. So, but no, I appreciate everything that they did during the pandemic. And then, like I said, I have a career that I love. I, the material things, like I have insurance, that's something that a lot of people can't say they have. So, I know if I was to get sick or hurt or something like that, that it's not going to catastrophically destroy me financially. I have, I have a great network of friends and other supporters, and there's ways that I can get out and connect with them. Even through we're at a point now where things are starting to open up a little bit. Social distancing is still important. I'm not going out. If right now all of a sudden baseball stadiums were open, I'm not sure I would go to one just
Yeah.
because you don't know. But but right now I'm able to connect with people at like smaller gatherings, a little bit staying away from each other, and there's I see a lot of hope out there. As tough as things are at times, the pandemic is what really dominated things for the last few months. But I see hope that things are getting better with that. And it's an absolute travesty of what happened to George Floyd and what has happened to countless hundreds, thousands of African Americans throughout our history. And that is, it's disgusting, but I have hope on that level as well, because what I've seen, and I'm sure you have seen as well over the past few days and last couple of weeks, is people from all walks of life that are just, they're done, they're fed up, and they're taking to the streets and peacefully protesting for change. And there are the bad apples out there, the just the disgusting human beings that are trying to ruin it by looting and rioting and causing havoc in another sort of way. But 99% of people they're just fed up and they're done with it. And I have hope that this might finally be a turning point. But at the same time, though, I do want to take it with a grain of salt, because there's been times before where things have looked like they were going to change, but didn't. And it's one of those things that if more people can really raise their voice up in this regard and admit to their biases and their privileges. I'll be the first to tell you that I'm one of those people that I have my own biases and privileges, and I know that, and I'm willing to talk about those, and I'm willing to change. But I do have hope. So, and that hope makes me happy as well.
How are you navigating these conversations with your kids? Are you okay if we talk about your kids for a second?
No, absolutely, we can. My 5-year-old doesn't understand it at all. My 8-year-old, because she has friends from different cultural, racial, national backgrounds or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
she doesn't really understand it either. She doesn't get why a person can be treated so differently just based on the color of their skin or their religion or whatever it may be. So it's been very tough with her, but I will say that I am very happy with the teachers that she's had so far, because she's very astute in some of these things as well, because we were flipping through Disney Plus looking for something to watch the other day, and the movie Ruby Bridges came up,
Mm.
and she stopped that. She goes, hey, I know Ruby Bridges. And she told me the whole story about it. She goes, I learned in school about how she was a little girl that went to school and she was treated very, very badly. And I was just blown away. I'm like, she's 8 years old. And I'm like, I'm very happy that her teachers have actually addressed those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But and then what else? Another thing that makes it tough is that a man that she calls uncle, my brother, I call him Brandon. He's my roommate from college. We met at orientation, and we, over the couple days orientation, we decided to be roommates. But I'm a white man from rural northern Michigan, and he is a black man from urban mid Michigan. I mean, we come from completely different backgrounds, but we really meshed as friends and brothers right away. And like I said, 20 years later, I mean, he's my brother, and my children call him uncle, and his kids call me uncle and everything. And makes it hard for my 8-year-old to realize too that we're family, and she can't understand it. So it's been tough to talk about with her, for sure.
I am so I don't, relieved, glad, some adjective, that people are now finally opened up to learning, to educating themselves, to raising awareness, to reading books, that we are self-educating on the fear and the hatred and the systemic oppression that has been implicit, explicit, biased, aggression, however you want to put it. And what I hope doesn't happen, so speaking of like hope, it's so easy to jump on the latest trend and the latest buzzword and the latest whatever it is. I mean, you even take a look at what happens with media sources. It's so easy to jump from one idea, one thing that's happening to the next, all within a matter of like minutes or a day. And whatever happened yesterday or last week tends to be forgotten about because now there's like the latest trend to be reporting on. What I hope doesn't happen is that I hope people don't read like one or two books or have one or two conversations and then say, oh, I'm an expert, or I'm now knowledgeable about everything what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
This is deeply rooted in everything.
Mm-hmm.
And doing it once or twice isn't enough. Doing it once or twice is a start.
Right.
And
yeah. Yeah. The big thing, earlier this week, you had Blackout Tuesday, where people were posting just a black square as their profile image on social media. And it needs to, that's a nice start. It shows support, but it needs to continue. And the big thing that to help it continue is, again, just going back and admitting the times you were wrong and admitting the privileges and everything that you have. And I think back to a few years ago when I forget which murder by police it was, because it's disgusting that, I mean, it's happened so many times I can't even figure out which one it was. But I remember calling somebody out, or calling it out about how it had to stop or whatever. And then a person that I deeply respected, was a neighbor growing up, served as a police officer in my hometown growing up, basically calling me I'm going to get a little bit graphic here. I'm not going to drop F-bombs or anything, but called me a snowflake libtard, that, if you could just realize that all people have to do is just shut their mouth and listen to police orders, and this never would have happened, blah, 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 blah. And just shredded me on a personal level as well in this whole thing, not only with their with their ignorance and their bigotry, in my opinion, and but then shredded me on a personal level. And I mean, I ended up blocking that person, but it shut me up too, because I didn't want to. I guess I didn't want to stir the pot, as you like to say, anymore about it. And then fast forward a couple years later, when Colin Kaepernick was protesting police brutality by kneeling during the national anthem, and the outcry with that, I said something about it, but it was more of my defense of it at the time was First Amendment states freedom of speech, and if this is how he chooses to protest, then you should support that. And then people shredded me once again about that, which a lot of people got shredded about that. And once again, it shut me up. And I look back at that in shame. You know, those times I had an opportunity to say more and I didn't. So I decided this time around that I'm not going to just stay silent. If I see something, I'm going to say something about it. And I actually called out a family member in the last couple of days about it when I said something about people needing to realize their privileges. A family member said that there's no such thing as white privilege. As long as you work hard, there shouldn't be any issues and whatnot. And I completely shredded this family member about it. And haven't heard anything else back from that family member. So they either blocked me or they decided to, or maybe they realized how wrong they were. I don't know, but I'm not seeking it out. I'm not going to apologize for that because it needed to be said. And if somebody's going to be that insensitive, that ignorant, that bigoted, I'm going to call it out this time. I'm not going to say something, get shredded, and then be silent. If someone wants to shred me now, go right ahead. And if anything, it says more about them than it does me.
So, right. I mean, one, we all have experienced, I think it's safe to say all. I try to avoid using absolutes,
Right.
like all or never or always, but you know, there's that experience of having your voice marginalized by somebody who perceives themselves as better or for whatever the reason. And, you know, I think about Black community members who are marginalized day in and day out, no matter what they do.
Right.
That's a tragedy, right? And but what I really want to focus on, and I don't know if I want to push back on you or if I want, but right, what happened here is that you were getting, and I'm going to use your word, shredded, and then that cycle continued by you shredding on somebody else. And I don't necessarily know how you're defining the word shredded. But I think about, how are we breaking the cycle of behavior and how are we approaching it, right? So the way that you may have been shredded on may have been different on how you approached your family member. And so I actually want to dive into that. Like, you know, there are these cycles that we are part of. How are we breaking the cycle that we know needs to be broken and disrupted?
So as I mentioned with the neighbor from growing up, where that person attacked me on a personal level by saying awful things about me, calling me names, different things like that. And you know, I don't want to sit here and say like the words that they said to me are anything remotely close to what people of color experience on a daily basis. That's not it at all. This is not a like you need to feel sorry for me moment by any means. The way I approached calling out my family member, I did not make any personal attacks. I did not say you're a bigoted POS. I did not call them names. You know, I did not use any language of any sort. The way I approached it was when they said that hard work gets you everywhere in life, and I'm an example of that. And if that's that, there's no such thing as white privilege.
Mm,
That's when I approached it with examples
yeah.
instead. So instead of just doing the typical social media mongering and calling them names and whatnot, I said, I said, I agree with you. Hard work does take you places, but your privilege shows when you think about things like, when's the last time you were in a store and was followed around for no reason? When's the last time you got pulled over for something simple like a broken tail light, and then the next thing you know, you're sitting on the sidewalk in handcuffs while your car is being searched?
Mhm.
Or, just I gave examples of
Yeah.
what that looks like instead of personally attacking that person. And then there
Mm,
was a response from them saying things like, well, one time my brother got choked out by a cop at a bar or something like that. And then I've been pulled over on my motorcycle before just because I ride a Harley. And you've given me examples of a couple of things that's happened in your life, but this is something that happens every day to people of color, especially Black men. So it was more of trying to be constructive and providing evidence and examples rather than attacking. So
mhm.
I guess I didn't look at it as me shredding my family member. So, but at the same time, I can kind of see just from your perspective how that could be construed as that, though. So I thank you
Right.
for pointing that out.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think it's important to make sure that, because to calibrate on terminology, because we all
Right.
define things differently. And
Right.
I was just having this conversation yesterday with a colleague, about, it was like survey development or something like that. And I said, look, we're not going to have time to calibrate on terminology. So, so when it comes to thinking about when we define things, how are we clear on that and not jumping to conclusions and inferring, jumping
Right.
up the ladder of inference without getting
Mm-hmm.
the details. And so, right, what I appreciate now you saying is it's how you approach it, right? It's not,
Mm-hmm.
name calling doesn't get people anywhere.
Right.
That's just, and so how are you trying to rationally be constructive, give the data or those constructive examples to ground your state, your state of belief,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is you're doing, do it. And I think you're able to do that because you do that day in and day out professionally, right? I mean, you de-escalate, student emotions and teach how to be reflective and constructive. And so I appreciate you being able to do that with a family member, because that's got to be really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been super comfortable with conflict anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not something I've never been one to really engage in debate or arguing on social media, because I mean, I especially don't like to do it in person. When you have to see someone face to face, and then but a lot of people, they feel that on social media they're almost faceless. So I think people say a lot of things on social media they wouldn't say to a person's face.
Yeah.
So, and I just the quote, I don't engage with trolls, so I never do that. But so when I'm calling out my family member, here very recently, it was tough to do. I mean, I didn't hit send on my response for quite a while. I thought about it and reread it several times, but again, it's something that sitting back and being silent doesn't solve problems. And a lot of people say if you're silent, you are part of the problem. And I agree with that to an extent, that you are part of the problem if you're silent. But the same time, though, just because you're not saying something on social media doesn't mean that you're not doing something else, though, too.
Right.
So to tell someone on social media, well, you haven't said something, so that must mean you're part of the problem. So you don't, that doesn't mean that that person's not out doing something else, whether it's participating in the protests or something along those lines. So
Yeah.
um, I hope that this is going to turn into a more constructive conversation from everybody, all parties involved around the country, around the world, because I mean this has become worldwide when you're seeing protests in the streets of Berlin, Germany, and you
Mhm.
know, and you know, I don't know of other cities right now because frankly, I maybe I'm part of the problem right now too, is where I don't watch the news much anymore. With just everything on the news, like, I mean, every day with the pandemic, it was just depressing, and just hearing the numbers and the suffering and everything, and then just so much of the news is so politicized at this point too, where it's just two squares with people of differing political views in them yelling at each other, and to me that's not the news. So I tend to get my news more from reading online and whatnot, and even that you got to take with a grain of salt because some of it can be so biased as well. So so I apologize for not knowing more places where these protests are taking place, but it's something that when people are saying that we haven't seen protests like this since the civil rights movement in the 1960s, you know, it really says something. It really says how fed up people are and how like the support is there. We just have to be constructive with our conversation and learn from one another and not criticize like what people are saying if what people are saying is with good intention. So we have to learn from one another on that. So because there's a lot of things I need to learn and a lot of other people need to do the same thing. We need to be constructive in the support of each other to help guide our learning versus just saying like, well, you said this, you're wrong, you're disgusting, so on and so forth. Now if someone is just being outright bigoted and disgusting, absolutely call them out and tell them that they're being bigoted. But we just need to be constructive. Sorry, I just keep circling back to the same thing here. So
Where do you see this? Where do you see our state of instruction and education going with our kids, and knowing how um, single perspective a lot of our teachings are, or even like references and resources? I think about our, history books. They're from one perspective and a very dominant culture perspective. And so, yeah, how do you see education being going forward?
well, it starts with what is education even going to be in the next few months?
Mm.
With the pandemic that has really kind of been put on the back burner as of right now, as it should be. I was actually listening to the Bill Nye podcast, Science Rules, and his question was, is the protest against systematic racism, police brutality, is the protest that's taking place worth the risk of spreading this global pandemic and making things worse in that regard?
Mhm.
And then that was the main theme of the podcast and the guest that he had on there. And in conclusion, I mean, there was a lot of dancing around it, but it was basically yes. I mean, this is something that has been going on for hundreds of years. That if we have the opportunity to break it down, then you know the pandemic getting worse is totally worth it. Is essentially what the conclusion was. That's the way I interpreted it, at least when I listened to that. But so, I mean, it really depends on what school is going to look like first. So, is it going to be quote unquote back to normal? Is it going to be fully online? Is it going to be a hybrid? We don't even know that yet. School districts, I mean, we're in the first week or so of summer break for most school districts at this point. So we're about 2 months out, but most they have no clue what's happening right now, what fall is going to look like. And I know the district that I'm moving back into in Las Vegas, they're talking that by the end of June they should have a plan. So and a lot of it's going to be based off of like, well, what's happening? Are those numbers still trending downward? Are there
Mhm.
less people getting sick? Are less people dying from the disease? Um, it'll be interesting to see that with the protests, is there going to be a spike in cases?
Mhm.
So, I mean, I can't blame a district for not knowing what's happening for the fall because there's just so many factors that go into it. So, but once we get back, you're absolutely 100% right. So many of the texts and the different things that schools use are just completely one-sided. Like the view is from an Anglo-Saxon white male point of view pretty much. So, and that's where one person can't necessarily just walk into a school and say, this is the textbook we're going to use this year. This one is much better. It's got more perspectives from different cultures and races and nationalities, et cetera. One person's not going to necessarily be able to exact much change by walking in and saying, this is the textbook we're going to use. But one person can be more selective in how they present the material and then other materials that they use. So I haven't used textbooks much at all in the last few years anyway. So it's been a lot more of finding those outside sources. So, I mean, as a social studies teacher by trade, I mean, there's tons of stuff out there for primary sources and different things that you have access to on the internet. And 99.9% of the time, it's absolutely free.
Right.
So there's different things that you can find out there. So, but even things like math, like, you read like story problems in elementary math and just how white centric a lot of the math problems are
Mhm.
as well. So, I mean, it's not, I, like you were saying, I don't want to use an absolute here. I don't want to say it's not that hard. I'll say it, but just understand it's not exactly what I mean. It's not that hard to write your own stuff, really, or find better things. So if the textbook has a word problem that is very culturally insensitive, what's to say you can't find another one or rewrite it to where it's much more accepting and, you know,
Culturally responsive.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's just teacher, if we really want to make changes, like teachers got to on an individual level need to start doing things, but they also got to demand change from above too. So if a school is looking to buy new textbooks, when it comes to textbook review, schools and districts, they have to include the teachers in on that, and they have to be better at selecting more culturally sensitive and responsive books if they're going to buy books, and not just have a textbook company come in and make their presentation and say, this book is $20 less than the other one, so we're going to go with this one. So
But so, I mean, so as a country, we are at that tipping point. I think we've already tipped. If we have, and if we haven't, then we will soon. But we have tipped when it comes to education reform. This pandemic and distance learning is forcing us to progress in education pedagogically and instructionally, which I guess is one and the same, to where we should have been maybe 15, 20 years ago. To consider that face-to-face instruction is the only way to teach is archaic. And what's happened with the pandemic is showing that this is how you differentiate your instruction. You can have it all online. You can have it blended. You can adjust the curriculum to meet the students' needs. There is a way to do that. And you don't just digitize a worksheet into a PDF and say, here, I've got my digital distance learning. That doesn't mean that's just nothing. I mean, and I'm not saying that worksheets are bad, because you take a look at the need for our little learners, penmanship and the tactile learning. I get that, but worksheets aren't going to prepare our kids for the future, for today. And so how are you differentiating your instruction for all students to succeed? And then I think, and so when you said the word normal, my hope is that, and I think that's our like word of the day here, is like hope. There's hope I hope we don't go back to normal. I hope we don't go back to past practice. I hope we don't fall back into old habits. We need to keep pushing ourselves to get into a state of education that breaks down those barriers in mindset of that learning only happens in person. It doesn't. And then I think to your other point about where we are with curriculum, we need to push that education reform to rewrite the curriculum. Curriculum does not happen through one textbook that is outdated a year from now. It's how are you being culturally responsive through your curriculum? And I love your example of a math problem. I take a look at math problems that my kids have, and just with the names that are being used are so one-sided, culturally centric, right? And that's not to anything on the school, it's the program that they use. And then I even think about, and this is a problem that we've talked about for ages, and standardized testing, and or even not testing, just very out of the box language. My kid, my one daughter, she had said, what is the word? She couldn't even pronounce it. It was the word yacht, and it was in a math problem. One, she just didn't know what the word was. She hadn't read it before. And two, she's like, well, what's a yacht? And I thought, okay, so if there is a problem, a math problem that is on a standardized test, that the kid knows how to do the math problem, but is so hung up on the terminology that's in the word problem because they may have never been exposed to what a yacht is. Well, that's just contributing to the whole, how are we really assessing our kids?
Yeah.
And how are
Well,
we?
and it continues into society because, I mean, you mentioned about a kid reading the word yacht. What is a yacht? And then, not to mention that, I mean, you've got a lot of our students are, they've never left their neighborhood, let alone gone across their city or been exposed to something like a yacht or something like that. I mean, the top 1% of anybody out there has an experience with a yacht. So, but into society, I just saw this yesterday. I forget where it was, somewhere in Southern California. They had some posters that they were using to continue to encourage people to socially distance. And the example was, for the top half, the poster, the top half was in English, the bottom half was in Spanish. The top half was telling people, socially distance, stay 6 feet away, about the length of a pair of skis. And first of all, it's like, well, first of all, where's the ski hill in Southern California? And second of all, you're already catering to the privileged,
Who know what it
that
is?
know what skis are and how long skis are. So the bottom half of it was just appalling. It was in Spanish. It was the same message, staying 6 feet away. But instead of using skis, they used 3 fruit and vegetable boxes, essentially implying that if you're speaking Spanish, that means that you work in the fields picking fruits and vegetables. That's the way I interpret it, at least. And it was just, it was just one of the most insensitive and downright just bigoted things I'd seen in quite a while.
That's a microaggression right there.
Right. Yeah. So, and we're talking that if kids are seeing that on standardized tests, and Ken Shelton, I did a webinar the other day with Ken Shelton, and something that he said, I'm paraphrasing here, is that if it's standardized, it's inherently racist. And I never looked at it before. When he brought that up, and I got thinking about it, and I started thinking of different things. I'm like, yeah, you're absolutely right. So, I mean, that question about the yacht, yeah, that's essentially, that is a racist question. Okay, the the poster encouraging people to socially distance with skis and fruit boxes, that is racist. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different changes that need to happen in education, in society. It's just, we have a lot of work to do. And like you said, it's not just about doing one or two things. We need to keep our foot on the gas at this
Right.
point.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm really, I hope that we don't go back to past practice. I hope that we keep pushing forward. We need to do it, again, coming back to learning and getting the foundations, it's repetition. It's doing it over and over again. And where the systemic oppression has been repeated over and over again to where it's been ingrained in how we have been unfortunately functioning as a group, we need to now repeat over and over again to break down that systemic behavior. And so repetition for the good at this point, so that we can sustain our intent here. I think that's what's huge.
Absolutely. So no, it's we're in the midst of history on several levels with the protests in the streets, the way we have lived the last few months in this pandemic. And another thing I saw, a lot of people are saying like 2020 just needs to go away. This is awful. But no, 2020 was humanity's test, and how we react to this test is going to dictate what the future is going to look like. So I've been saying throughout the pandemic that I had hope that we were all going to be better coming out of it. And now with the protests over George Floyd's murder, I have hope that things are going to be better, but it's going to take work on all levels to make sure we are better.
We have to be. We keep saying we have to be better for our kids. We want to give our kids a better future. Well, you know what? A better future is for Black boys to not get the talk anymore. From when they go from being a child to a threat. And no, that's not acceptable. It's not
acceptable. No.
And so that's why I had been asked, why I asked, like, how, if at all, are you navigating these conversations with your kids? Because, because our kids are really similar in age. And so I think about, to your point, my 6-year-old doesn't understand. I mean, she was able to say, well, she's got, that she has white skin. Her friend at school has dark skin, and dark skin being black skin, brown skin, whatever color, but it's not white. And so she's able to differentiate. But, when you were saying your kids can just go out to the park and make friends with anybody, they make friends, right? So for her, she's not comprehending the fear and the hatred that people have because of the color of someone's skin. And then as older, my 12-year-old, he sees it, he's questioning it, he's asking questions that I don't have answers to. And so how are we learning together?
Yeah, like I said, yeah, it's going to be a struggle, and people just got to be willing to talk and willing to learn and willing to accept criticism, and that's really the only way at this point.
And be vulnerable enough to have that self-awareness to say, I need to learn, I need to be better, I need to be that upstander. Because you were even saying, like, you're done standing on the sidelines. If somebody calls you out on something and then your voice was marginalized, well, think about everybody whose voices have been marginalized for centuries. And so we no longer can afford to be on the sidelines. We have to say something. We have to do something. It's beyond the talk. What are we doing? And what I appreciated also you saying is, just because you're not posting something on social media, which is not the end all be all to everything, people are taking action in ways that they know how to take action, or ways that they're able to take action. And just because you're not putting it on social media doesn't mean you're doing it in other ways, right? Like, I'm in a book study now. I am thinking about, how am I talking with my kids? I'm thinking about, what does this mean to push and reform curriculum to be culturally responsive? We've been talking about it. What are we actually doing about it? And so I want to thank you for that as well, bringing that to light.
And I just want to thank you as well for this opportunity just to talk. I mean, like you said, we had no agenda. There was no questions. This was just a conversation, and I want to thank you for the opportunity for the conversation. And I remember a couple of months ago when you were in the planning phases of putting together this whole thing, and how excited you were, and you asked if I'd be a part of it at some point when it came together. And I mean, I absolutely accepted. So, and I'm so happy to see that this passion project of yours has come together now. And I'm really looking forward to checking out some of the others as well, because right now, I'm going to admit I got a little bit of that imposter syndrome, only because I know that you only talk to some of the finest, and so I'm so honored that I can be part of that as well.
And see, I think that's a huge, I don't know if it's a misnomer or a misconception. I want to talk to everybody, right? I mean, I would say the finest is everybody, because everybody has a story to share.
Mm-hmm.
um, and how can we can get better by learning from each other. And that's what I want to do. And I want to learn from people, and I want to share stories and preserve the conversation. And I think this is where I'm limited, and I'm sheltered, right? I only have a very specific niche of people that I feel safe and comfortable reaching out to start. I like how you named the passion project. I hope, which is like our word of the day now, I hope that I can talk to more people outside of this niche, because I want to hear people's voices. I like talking to people. So I like
Well,
hearing.
I find it fitting too that we're recording this on June 6th, which is the anniversary of the D-Day invasion, where Allied forces invaded Europe to rid the continent of fascism and Nazism and bigotry on that level. I just only hope that now, realizing that today is that anniversary, that we can continue that with the problems that we have now today, and we can invade our country to get rid of those issues as well.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope that we can talk again. This isn't a one and done.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, I've been lucky enough to have you come on to my podcast a couple of different times, and we're always a Voxer, a tweet, or text message, phone call, whatever it may be away. So anytime you want to chat, I am 100% open to doing so.
And same here. I want you to keep sharing your story with me.
Absolutely. So.
All right. Well, Kyle, thank you. Have a great rest of the day. And please, if you have any other nuggets or insights, let me know, because we've got to make this better for everybody.
Absolutely. So thanks again.
Thank you. I'll talk to you later.
Yep.
Bye.
See ya.